What if, one night, you saw God himself? What if he called your name and asked you to confront kings, to challenge injustice, to speak of a future no one believed? Would you answer that call, or would you run? Tonight, we peel back the layers of one of the Bible's most mysterious prophets. From hidden visions to world-shaking predictions, Isaiah's voice echoes from ancient palaces to modern streets. And his story may change how you see your own. Picture Jerusalem, a city at twilight, shadows lengthening, hope fading. Beyond its walls, empires clash and armies gather. Inside, a young man walks alone, his heart heavy with questions, unaware that destiny is waiting. Long before the birth of empires, before history wrote its headlines, God spoke through people just like us. And Isaiah's journey from doubt to destiny begins here, in the beating heart of a troubled world. To uncover this destiny, we must first return to where it all began. Imagine a world divided, trembling at the edge of chaos. Isaiah's world was just like that, torn, uncertain, and on the brink. Centuries before Isaiah was born, a single nation called Israel once stood united. But by his time, that unity was only a memory. Two kingdoms now faced each other, Israel in the north, Judah in the south, brothers separated by generations of conflict and pride. Their leaders fought for power, not for peace. Old wounds refused to heal. Border raids and silent hatred smoldered like coals beneath the surface, and looming beyond their walls, a new threat rose in the east, Assyria. A mighty empire, ruthless and hungry, its armies sweeping across the map like a storm. Assyria was the superpower of its age, with ambitions that reached as far as the eye could see. Their kings, from distant Nineveh, sent messengers demanding tribute, pay up or be destroyed. The northern kingdom of Israel would one day fall to their swords, and Judah, where Isaiah grew up, would live in their shadow for decades. But this was not just a story of borders and armies. This was a crisis in the soul of a nation. On the surface, Judah seemed to prosper. The streets of Jerusalem bustled with trade. Markets overflowed with food and fine cloth. Wealthy homes rose higher, stone by stone. The army trained hard, and people spoke of strength. But beneath that prosperity, something was deeply broken. Injustice spread like a sickness. Rich landowners bought up field after field until the poor had nowhere left to go. Leaders grew fat from bribes, blind to suffering. Orphans and widows were pushed to the margins, their cries ignored. Isaiah would later thunder, "Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field till no space is left, and you live alone in the land." Isaiah 5:8. Worship, too, lost its heart. The temple still echoed with prayers and songs, but outside, idols multiplied on every hill. God's people, once freed from Egypt, called to a covenant of faithfulness, now bowed to the very things they made with their hands. They chased after gods of stone and wood, believing these would give them luck or power. "Your land is full of idols," Isaiah would warn. "They bow down to the work of their hands." Isaiah 2:8. This was the spiritual crisis of Isaiah's day, a time of outward success but inner emptiness, a society that seemed to have everything but forgot what mattered most. Jerusalem, the city where Isaiah lived, stood at the very center of all this tension. Its walls rose high above the valleys, ancient stones bearing witness to both faith and fear. Jerusalem was more than a city. It was a symbol, a promise, and a test. Here, Solomon had built the great temple, where the God of Abraham was said to dwell. People believed as long as the temple stood, they were safe. But Isaiah saw beneath the stone and gold. He saw the emptiness of religion without justice. He saw the danger of confusing tradition with true faith. Politically, Jerusalem was a chessboard for kings and diplomats. Judah's rulers, played a dangerous game, caught between Assyria's threats and the lure of alliances with Egypt or Babylon. Some called for war, others for surrender. Some trusted treaties, chariots, and horses. Few remembered the God who had once parted the sea for their ancestors. Isaiah cried out, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel." Isaiah 31:1. Why did God choose this moment, this city, this people, to raise up a prophet? Because in the Bible, moments of greatest crisis are often moments of greatest calling. When darkness seems thickest, a spark can change everything. Isaiah's voice would become that spark. He would step into the noise, the injustice, the compromise, and speak with the clarity of thunder, not as a judge above his people, but as one who saw their pain, their fear, their longing to belong. He would become the conscience of a nation, calling them back to something ancient and true. Isaiah's story begins not with triumph, but with trouble. And that is what makes it so real, so human. He lived in a time when faith felt risky, when trust in God seemed almost foolish, when the world demanded easy answers and quick alliances. Yet God chose him to remind the people that true strength comes not from walls or weapons, but from justice, mercy, and faith. There is a lesson here for all of us. Prosperity can hide decay. Tradition can drift from truth. And sometimes the voice that challenges us most is the voice we need to hear. But the story doesn't stop here. In the midst of confusion and fear, something extraordinary was about to happen to Isaiah himself, an encounter that would change his life and the destiny of a nation forever. Have you ever felt truly small, lost in a place too big, too holy, too overwhelming to comprehend? That's where Isaiah found himself, one day in the temple in the very heart of Jerusalem. He wasn't a king, he wasn't a priest, he was just a man seeking God, maybe carrying questions and fears. The nation was trembling, enemies gathered at the border, and uncertainty hung in the air like a storm about to break. But inside those ancient stone walls, something greater was about to happen. In the year that King Uzziah died, a year marked by loss and uncertainty, Isaiah came to the temple to worship. Maybe he sought comfort. Maybe he simply needed hope. What he found would change the course of his life forever. Suddenly, the ordinary world fell away. Isaiah saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Isaiah 6:1. It was a vision unlike any other. The walls seemed to shake. The air was thick with glory. Above the throne, mighty seraphim hovered, angelic beings, each with 6 wings. With 2, they covered their faces. With 2, they covered their feet. And with 2, they flew. They cried to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory." Isaiah 6:3. Their voices thundered like 100 storms. The foundations trembled. Smoke filled the house. Isaiah was overwhelmed, not by comfort, but by awe. This was holiness, not the gentle, warm holiness we sometimes imagine, but a presence so pure and powerful that no one could stand before it unshaken. And in that moment, Isaiah was undone. He saw himself not as a prophet, not even as a good man, but as someone deeply flawed. "Woe to me," he cried, "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Isaiah 6:5. It's a raw moment, a man stripped bare before the truth, all his failures, all his words, all his compromises, suddenly visible. He knew what everyone feared. To see God's holiness is to see your own weakness. To stand in the presence of the King is to realize how far you fall short. Yet even as Isaiah trembled, something unexpected happened. One of the seraphim flew to him, holding a live coal from the altar, hot, burning, dangerous. With it, the angel touched Isaiah's mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." Isaiah 6:7. Can you imagine the pain and the relief of that moment? Isaiah was not condemned. He was cleansed. His shame didn't end his story. It prepared him for a new one. In the place where Isaiah felt most unworthy, grace broke through, and then a question echoed across the temple. "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah 6:8. God wasn't looking for a perfect messenger. He was looking for someone willing. Isaiah, still shaking, still raw from the vision, answered with one of the most powerful lines in all of Scripture. "Here am I. Send me." Isaiah 6:8. That simple answer would shape the rest of his life. He didn't know where the call would lead. He didn't know what it would cost. But he knew this. He had seen the King. He had been forgiven. And now he had a mission. For Isaiah, the journey began not in a place of confidence, but in a moment of surrender. He faced the truth about himself, about his people, about the world, and only then could he become a voice for justice, hope, and redemption. This vision in the temple wasn't just a private experience, it was the turning point for a whole nation. Isaiah's words, born from that moment of awe and humility, would challenge kings, confront injustice, and shape the faith of millions. It all began with an encounter, with the holy that revealed the human, and with the grace that transforms. What about us? Change often starts where comfort ends. Transformation begins when we dare to face the truth about ourselves, about the world, about the God who calls us. Like Isaiah, we're not chosen because we're flawless. We're chosen because we're willing. But the story doesn't stop here. Isaiah's vision was just the beginning. Ahead lay the challenge of speaking truth to power, of standing for justice in a broken world, and of trusting that the same God who called him would never leave him alone. What happens when a whole society loses its way, but nobody dares to speak up? That's where Isaiah stepped in, not with easy words, but with truth sharp enough to wake a sleeping nation. After the vision in the temple, Isaiah could no longer stay silent. He walked the streets of Jerusalem with new eyes. What he saw troubled him deeply. There was wealth, yes, shining markets, growing cities, fine homes rising behind tall walls. But there was also pain. He saw children hungry and barefoot, mothers weeping for justice, and the powerful living as if God did not see. Isaiah became the voice for those without a voice. He called out the greed he saw in the upper class. Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field till no space is left and you live alone in the land. Isaiah 5:8. He watched as landowners grabbed more and more while families lost everything. This was not just economics, it was injustice, plain and simple. He thundered against those who used their position to crush the weak. The Lord enters into judgment against the elders and leaders of his people. It is you who have ruined my vineyard. The plunder from the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor? Declares the Lord Almighty. Isaiah 3:14-15. Isaiah saw leaders who protected their own power instead of protecting the most vulnerable. He knew God's heartbeat for justice, and he wasn't afraid to say so. But the problems went deeper than money and power. All across Judah, people came to the temple, brought sacrifices, and sang songs. Outwardly, they looked faithful. But Isaiah saw through the show. Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. Even when you offer many prayers, I am not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Isaiah 1:13-15. What God wanted was not empty rituals, but changed lives. Isaiah called the people to something higher. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong, learn to do right. Seek justice, defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. Isaiah 1:16-17. True worship, he insisted, starts with compassion and action. It's not about words. It's about loving your neighbor as yourself. But there was another poison in the nation's soul: idolatry. Every hill and street corner seemed to hold a new statue or altar. God's people bowed to what their own hands had made, hoping for luck, wealth, or safety. Isaiah's voice cut through the lies. Their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their fingers have made. Isaiah 2:8. Why was this so dangerous? Because idols can never deliver what they promise. They blind us to real hope, to real power, to the living God who cares for every person. Isaiah saw that chasing false gods, whether money, power, or anything else, always leaves people empty. He warned that ignoring God's justice leads to disaster. He told a parable about a vineyard, a favorite image for Israel. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Isaiah 5:1-2. God had given his people every chance, but instead of justice and righteousness, he found bloodshed and cries for help. Isaiah didn't soften the truth. He said that if the people didn't change, trouble would come, not as punishment for breaking rules, but as a natural result of breaking trust and compassion. So why did Isaiah speak out so boldly? Because he knew God was not interested in religion for show. God's heart is for justice. Rituals can't cover up selfishness. Offerings can't erase cruelty. A community only thrives when compassion leads the way. And what about us? Isaiah's world may seem ancient, but his words cut just as deep today. In every generation, there are voices calling for justice, truth, and mercy. There are still widows and orphans, still systems that favor the powerful, still temptations to put trust in money or status. Isaiah reminds us that faith is not just believing the right things, it's doing the right things. It's standing up for the oppressed, loving those who can't pay us back, and refusing to worship the idols of our age. True worship is lived out in kindness, honesty, and a hunger for justice. But the story doesn't stop here. Calling out sin is only the beginning. Isaiah's next challenge would be to speak truth not just to the people, but to the kings themselves, to power, to politics, to the very heart of a nation's fears. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between what felt safe and what you believed was right? Isaiah knew that tension well, and so did his king. The city of Jerusalem was gripped by fear. Enemy armies had gathered on the borders. To the north, Israel and Syria had joined forces, threatening to destroy Judah. Panic spread like wildfire through the streets. Every advisor in the palace had a different plan. Some said, "Let's run to Egypt for help. Their chariots will protect us." Others whispered, "Maybe we should just surrender. It's hopeless to resist." But King Ahaz, caught between fear and pride, couldn't decide. That's when Isaiah appeared at the palace gates. He wasn't there to flatter or to frighten. He was there to speak truth to power. He found King Ahaz inspecting the city's water supply, anxious and restless. Isaiah's words were gentle but clear. "Be careful. Keep calm. Don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood." Isaiah 7:4. He urged Ahaz to trust God, not alliances, not armies, not his own cleverness, but Ahaz wanted guarantees. He wanted safety he could see and control. So God, through Isaiah, offered a sign, an act of grace in a world built on fear. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. Isaiah 7:11. But Ahaz, perhaps afraid of what the answer might mean, refused. He hid behind words of false piety. I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. It was a polite way of saying, no thanks, God. I'd rather handle this myself. But Isaiah wasn't deterred. He looked the king in the eye and delivered a prophecy that would echo through centuries. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Isaiah 7:14. Emmanuel, God with us. A promise that God does not abandon his people even when leaders falter. A hope that outlasts any crisis. This was no mere prediction for Ahaz's day. It was a prophecy that would find its fullest meaning hundreds of years later, in the birth of Jesus, a reminder that God's plans run deeper than politics or fear. But in that moment, Ahaz couldn't believe he chose alliances over trust. He leaned on foreign powers instead of the God who had rescued Israel from slavery, parted the Red Sea, and built their nation from dust. Isaiah saw the cost of that choice, not just for one man, but for a whole country. He warned, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah 31:1. The lesson is as real today as it was then. Every age faces its own Ahaz moments. In times of crisis, we all look for security, whether in wealth, alliances, technology, or public opinion. But Isaiah's message rings out. Trust that rests on anything less than God is always fragile. When the world shakes, it is faith, not force, that endures. Look at our own world, still filled with uneasy alliances, political chess games, leaders torn between fear and hope. From the Middle East to the halls of Washington, the headlines change, but the human story doesn't. We long for guarantees, for power, for someone else to fight our battles. But every generation faces the same question. Do we choose the easy answer or the right one? Do we put our trust in what we can control or in the God who holds history in his hands? Isaiah stood before kings, not as a rival, but as a messenger of something greater than politics. He reminded Ahaz and us that real security doesn't come from deals or defenses. It comes from knowing who stands with you, even when you stand alone. Sometimes courage means saying no to the crowd and yes to conviction. It means risking popularity or safety for a deeper kind of peace. But the story doesn't stop here. Isaiah's greatest challenge wasn't just in palace halls. Ahead lay miracles, warnings, and a vision that would outlast every king. A vision of hope for the broken, the lost, and all who dare to trust beyond what they can see. What if you could see signs from God, moments that break the rules of nature, or parables that leave you questioning everything you thought you knew? Isaiah's life was marked by such moments. For him, prophecy wasn't just words, it was lived experience, filled with miracles and stories that reached every heart in Judah. Let's begin with a king on the edge of death. Hezekiah, ruler of Judah, was gravely ill. His palace was silent, heavy with dread. Isaiah arrived not to offer comfort, but to deliver a hard message. This is what the Lord says. Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover. Isaiah 38:1. But Hezekiah, instead of giving up, turned his face to the wall and prayed with all his heart. Tears streamed down his face. He begged for more time, and God heard. Before Isaiah had even left the courtyard, a new word came. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will add 15 years to your life. Isaiah 38:5. The news was stunning. But how would Hezekiah know it was true? Isaiah gave him a sign, a miracle that defied reason. He told Hezekiah, "I will make the shadow cast by the sun go back the 10 steps it has gone down." Isaiah 38:8. And it happened. Time itself seemed to bend. The sun's shadow moved backwards, and everyone in Jerusalem saw that God was at work. But not all of Isaiah's lessons were dramatic miracles. Sometimes they came through stories and symbols, pictures painted with words or with actions. Isaiah loved parables, and none was more powerful than his song of the vineyard. He sang of a vineyard carefully tended, planted on fertile ground, protected and loved. But when harvest came, the grapes were sour, wild, bitter, useless. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? God asks. When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Isaiah 5:4. The vineyard was Israel itself, blessed with every gift, but returning in justice for kindness. It's a parable that still stings. When we are given so much, what do we give back? Isaiah's message wasn't only in words. Sometimes God asked him to act out the message, making it unforgettable. He was told to give his sons symbolic names. One son was named Shir Jashub, meaning a remnant shall return, a promise that hope would survive even after disaster. Another was Maher Shalal Hashbaz, quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil, a warning of coming invasion. Every time their names were spoken, the people heard the message again. And then there was the moment Isaiah was told to walk barefoot and stripped for 3 years, a sign to Judah that Egypt and Cush, nations in whom they were tempted to trust, would be led away as captives. Isaiah 23:4. It was uncomfortable, it was shocking, but it was real. It forced everyone to pay attention, to realize that God's word was not just something to be heard, but something to be seen and remembered. Why all these signs and wonders? Because God knew that words alone can be forgotten. Stories stick. Miracles force us to stop and ask, what is God saying to us? Each sign, each parable, each miracle in Isaiah's story pointed to 2 things, justice and hope. Justice because God is not indifferent to suffering, to cheating, or to people being crushed. Hope because no matter how dark the day, God always leaves a door open for return, for forgiveness, for new beginnings. And perhaps most important, these wonders and parables proved that Isaiah wasn't just spinning tales. His words matched the world. When he spoke of disaster, it came. When he promised deliverance, it happened. Prophecy in Isaiah's life was testable, rooted in events people could see, in lives they could touch, in history itself. So, what does all this mean for us? Signs may look different now, but God still speaks through stories, through changed lives, through unexpected grace. Sometimes, the most powerful miracles are the ones that wake us up, call us back, and show us that there is always more than meets the eye. But the story doesn't stop here. Isaiah's signs were just the beginning. Ahead lay a vision so vast it would stretch from ancient empires to every nation under heaven. A vision of judgment and redemption, of hope for the world. What if your words could reach beyond your own people, beyond borders, beyond time itself? Isaiah's voice did exactly that. He wasn't just a prophet for Judah, he spoke to the world. As Jerusalem's streets echoed with rumors of war and shifting alliances, Isaiah lifted his eyes above the city walls. He saw empires rise and fall, Babylon, Egypt, Moab, Damascus, Tyre. Nations that seemed invincible, cities that glimmered with wealth and pride. He spoke of Babylon, the empire everyone feared. In his day, Babylon was rising, powerful and proud, a city of gardens and palaces. Isaiah declared, Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. Isaiah 13:19. He saw its future, a day when its towers would be silent, its people scattered, its glory just a memory. And centuries later, that is exactly what happened. Isaiah prophesied against Egypt, the old enemy to the south. Once mighty, once the source of terror and riches, Egypt would face civil war and confusion. He warned, "The Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt." The idols of Egypt tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians melt with fear. Isaiah 19:1. Even Egypt's wisdom would fail, but Isaiah didn't just predict disaster. He spoke of a day when Egypt would turn to God, and God would heal them. "Blessed be Egypt, my people," he declared in words that stunned his listeners. Isaiah 19:25. He spoke to Moab, neighbors across the Dead Sea, known for their pride and their pain. He described a time when their cities would be emptied, their people desperate for hope. To Damascus, capital of Syria, he announced, "Ruin! Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins." Isaiah 17:1. He prophesied against Tyre, the trading giant on the sea. Tyre was rich, powerful, and connected to nations far beyond Israel's borders. But Isaiah saw its end coming, a time when its songs would be silenced, its wealth scattered, its fame forgotten for a generation. Isaiah 23. What was the point of all these messages? Isaiah wasn't just predicting the news, he was revealing a greater truth. No nation stands outside God's plans. No empire, no matter how strong, can last forever. Human power is always temporary. History remembers Babylon's walls, Egypt's monuments, Tyre's ships and traders. But all the riches, all the armies, all the alliances, none could stand when their time was up. The fate of nations lies not in their strength, but in their place in God's story. Isaiah's words cut through pride and fear. He reminded kings and common people that their security could never be found in armies or idols, in gold or in glory. God's vision is global. His heart is for every people, every nation, every tribe. Isaiah's prophecies warned of judgment, yes, but they also pointed to hope, a future where enemies could become friends, where the nations would gather not for war, but to worship together. This message would have sounded radical, maybe even impossible, in Isaiah's day. Most people saw their nation as special, different, set apart. But Isaiah called them to something bigger, to see themselves as part of a world that God loved, challenged, and wanted to restore. For us today, Isaiah's global vision still matters. We watch as powers rise and fall, as alliances form and break, as history repeats itself in new ways. Nations build and lose their empires, leaders come and go, but God's perspective remains timeless, just, and full of purpose. The lesson is simple but profound. No power on earth is forever. Only God is eternal. Our hope and our future are safest when they rest in Him, not in the shifting sands of human achievement. But the story doesn't stop here. Isaiah's vision of the nations was just one part of his message. Ahead lies a promise even greater, a glimpse of a Savior, of healing, and of a peace the world still longs for. What if hope could grow from a stump, a promise rising from what looked dead and forgotten? That's the picture Isaiah gave his people. In the darkest days when kingdoms fell and dreams were shattered, he pointed forward. He spoke not just of judgment, but of a Savior who would come. Isaiah described him this way: a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. Isaiah 11:1-2. Jesse was the father of King David, and the stump was what remained after Israel's glory had been cut down. But Isaiah saw life where others saw only loss. He saw God's promise taking root in the ruins. This branch would be a new kind of king, not a warrior, not a conqueror, but one filled with wisdom, justice, and peace. He would bring healing to the broken and hope to those who felt forgotten. Isaiah paints a world transformed. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. Isaiah 11:6-9. Imagine a world where enemies become friends, where fear is replaced by trust. But Isaiah's most mysterious and powerful prophecy comes in chapter 53. He writes of a suffering servant, someone who would take on pain, rejection, and injustice for the sake of others. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 53:3-5. Who was this servant? For generations, Jewish readers saw in these words the story of Israel itself, wounded by the world, but chosen for a greater purpose. Christians, centuries later, saw Jesus in every line, one who suffered not for himself, but for others. His death on the cross and the hope of resurrection fulfilled the deepest longing for forgiveness and new life. But Isaiah's vision was always bigger than any one moment in history. He spoke of a servant whose suffering would break the cycle of violence, one who would respond to hatred with forgiveness, who would choose humility over pride and love over revenge. Why does this matter? Because every generation asks the same questions. Does suffering ever have meaning? Is there hope beyond pain? Isaiah answered with a message that still shakes us today. Yes, pain can have a purpose. Yes, wounds can lead to healing, not just for individuals, but for nations, for families, for all who carry scars. By his wounds, we are healed. Those words ring through the centuries. They remind us that hope doesn't come from ignoring pain, but from facing it and finding that God is there. What do you hold on to when everything familiar is gone? When home is a memory and hope feels far away? Isaiah spoke to a people who knew exile, loss, and the ache of starting over. His words offered comfort, not just then, but for anyone who's ever felt alone or forgotten. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim that her sin has been paid for. Isaiah 41-2. These words echoed across the desert, carried by the wind to those in captivity. They were not words of blame, but of healing, a gentle whisper from God himself, telling his people, "You are not abandoned. I have not forgotten you." Isaiah paints God as a shepherd, gently gathering the scattered. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. Isaiah 40:11. For every soul lost in the wilderness, for every heart broken by distance or disaster, Isaiah's God comes near, not with anger, but with compassion. But restoration wouldn't come the way anyone expected. Isaiah foretold the rise of a surprising figure, Cyrus, king of Persia. Not an Israelite, not someone from within the chosen people, but a foreign ruler. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him. For the sake of Jacob my servant, of Israel my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. Isaiah 45:1-4. God used Cyrus to set the exiles free, to open the door home. It's a bold reminder. God's purposes reach beyond boundaries and expectations. He can use anyone, anywhere to bring about restoration. Isaiah's vision doesn't stop at return from exile. He looks beyond to a world transformed. He dreams of a new Jerusalem, a city where tears are wiped away, where sorrow is forgotten, where joy fills the streets. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. Isaiah 65:17-18. He paints pictures of peace so deep, even nature is renewed. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. Isaiah 35:1-2. The world, once marked by brokenness, becomes a garden again. But Isaiah's vision is bigger than just one city or one people. He sees every nation streaming to the mountain of the Lord. Foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to serve him, to love the name of the Lord, these I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Isaiah 56:6-7. It's a world where divisions are healed, where all peoples gather, not in fear, but in worship and unity. For the exiles, then and now, these promises matter. Isaiah tells us that no matter how far we wander, no matter how deep the exile, restoration is possible. Hope can bloom in the desert. God's faithfulness is stronger than any failure or distance. What does that mean for us today? It means your story isn't over, even when you feel lost. It means God's grace can find you, even when you're far from home. It means new beginnings are possible, not because we deserve them, but because God delights in restoration. And it means that God's vision is always wider than our own. He welcomes the outsider. He works through unexpected people. He invites us into a world where joy replaces sorrow and peace overcomes fear. But the story doesn't stop here. Isaiah's promises lead us forward to a final vision of celebration, healing, and joy that reaches every heart and every nation under heaven. Isaiah's story reminds us that greatness begins with simple faith and courage. He was an ordinary man, called to deliver an extraordinary message, one that echoed through kings, empires, and centuries. He stood for justice when others chose silence. He trusted God's promises when the world seemed lost. And he spoke hope into places where hope had run dry. Maybe that's the lesson for us tonight. God still calls ordinary people, people like you and me, to become voices of truth, healing, and compassion in a divided world. Isaiah didn't know what the future would hold, but he said yes. He dared to answer the call. So, if you heard that call, what would you do? If you felt the tug to speak up, to reach out, to build bridges instead of walls, how would you respond? Could we be living in days when courage matters more than ever? What would happen if we listened, believed, and stepped out in faith just like Isaiah? If this journey with Isaiah has inspired you, let's keep the conversation going. Like this video if it spoke to you. Share your thoughts, questions, or prayers in the comments below. And subscribe for more stories that can change how you see faith in the world. Who knows? The next story we tell might be yours. Because even in the darkest night, a single voice of hope can change everything, and grace always has the final word.